Nobody in that break room expected the quiet maintenance guy to say yes. But Nathan Carter didn't flinch. He didn't laugh nervously or make excuses. He just looked at the photo on Marcus's phone, then looked up at the circle of coworkers watching him with barely concealed amusement and said, "Set it up." The room went dead silent, because the woman on that screen wasn't just beautiful. She was Victoria Ashford, 30 years old, self-made billionaire. And according to every rumor that had circulated through 3 industries and a dozen tabloid covers, completely, utterly, and apparently unfixably alone. Everyone had an opinion about why. Nobody had the courage to ask her directly. If this is your first time finding this channel, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far these stories travel. Now stay with me until the very end, because this one doesn't go where you think it's going. The elevator in the Hargrove Grand's East Wing had been making a grinding sound for 11 days before anyone filed a formal complaint. Nathan had known about it for 9. He'd been tracking it the way he tracked everything in this building, quietly, methodically, on a handwritten notepad he kept in the back pocket of his work pants. The notepad was cheap, the kind with the flimsy cardboard cover that bent if you sat on it wrong. It had a coffee ring on the front from a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago when he'd set it down on the break room counter without thinking. He hadn't replaced it. He wasn't sentimental about things exactly, but he didn't like wasting what still worked. That was a philosophy that extended well beyond maintenance supplies. It was a Thursday morning in early October when Marcus Teller found him crouched inside the elevator's mechanical panel on the 4th floor, one flashlight clenched between his teeth, both hands occupied with wiring that had started to fray near the junction box. "You hear about the charity gala next month?" Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe like he had nowhere to be. Marcus was the hotel's front desk supervisor, 36 years old, perpetually 15 minutes ahead of whatever gossip was currently circulating through the staff. He had an instinct for knowing when someone needed a distraction and a completely separate instinct for deciding to offer that distraction anyway. Nathan didn't look up. Hotel's hosting it. Big donors, catered, the whole thing." A pause. "There's going to be some real heavy hitters in attendance." "Good for them." "You're not even a little curious?" "About a gala I won't be attending." Nathan pulled the flashlight from his teeth and redirected the beam. "No." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Nathan had learned that Marcus's silences were never actually silent. They were just him building a runway for whatever he actually wanted to say. "You know who's on the donor list this year?" "I don't." "Victoria Ashford." The name landed in the mechanical room the way names like that always did, with a certain weight that had nothing to do with the woman herself and everything to do with what people had decided to attach to her. Nathan had heard the name before. You couldn't work in the orbit of luxury hospitality without hearing it. She'd built Ashford Creative Technologies from a 2-person operation out of a converted warehouse into a company valued somewhere north of $4 billion before she turned 29. The financial press loved her. The gossip press loved her more. "Okay," Nathan said. "Okay?" Marcus straightened up. "That's all you've got?" "What do you want me to say, Marcus?" "She's going to be in this building, in person. Have you seen pictures of this woman?" Nathan sat back on his heels and looked at Marcus for the first time since he'd appeared in the doorway. "She's a hotel guest. Same as any other guest." Marcus made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "Man, I don't know if you're the most grounded person I've ever met, or if something's genuinely wrong with you." "Probably the second one," Nathan said, and went back to the wiring. He ate lunch alone most days. Not because he was antisocial, he could hold a conversation, could be warm when warmth was called for, but because the 40 minutes he got in the middle of a shift were 40 minutes he used to call his daughter. Lily was 7. She had her mother's eyes, a gap between her 2 front teeth that the dentist said would close on its own, and an absolutely ferocious opinion about which dinosaurs were underrated. Currently, she was in a triceratops phase, which meant that any conversation Nathan had with her was at risk of being redirected to a discussion of the frill's defensive utility. "Ms. Patterson said we're doing the science fair in March," Lily told him. She was eating something crunchy. He could hear it. Crackers, probably. She went through crackers the way other kids went through candy. "Yeah, what are you thinking about doing?" "Something with volcanoes, maybe, or dinosaurs." Those are very different projects. I know, I'm still deciding. Another crunch. Are you coming home for dinner? I'll be there by 6:30. Don't let Mrs. Okafor feed you anything before then, okay? You'll ruin your appetite. She already gave me crackers. That's different. That's a snack. She also gave me half a sandwich. Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose. Lily. I was hungry, completely unrepentant. Can we have pasta? We can have pasta. The kind with the butter and the cheese, not the red sauce. You say that like I ever make it any other way. She laughed, and it was the best sound in a 24-hour period that had already included the satisfying click of a properly sealed junction box. He stayed on the phone until the last possible minute, then tucked the handset into his breast pocket and finished the second half of his sandwich standing at the window, watching a delivery truck back into the hotel's service entrance with more confidence than the geometry of the situation warranted. The blind date was not his idea. He wanted to be clear about that, at least internally, in the way that a person is clear about things they can't actually say out loud without sounding defensive. It started the following Tuesday, in the break room, during a shift overlap that happened to gather 6 people around the coffee machine at the same time. Nathan was refilling his thermos. Marcus was there, along with Diane from housekeeping, 2 of the front desk associates whose names Nathan always mixed up, Jordan and Joel, one of whom was taller, and a kitchen prep worker named Cass who was barely 22 and collected drama the way some people collected stamps. The conversation had been about the gala, which was 3 weeks out, and which the hotel staff had apparently decided to treat as a community event they were personally invested in. Names were being dropped. Attendee lists reviewed. At some point, Victoria Ashford's name came up again, and this time it wasn't just Marcus saying it. It was everyone, and the tone was different. There was laughter underneath it, the particular kind of laughter that meant someone was about to say something they thought was clever. She's been to like 4 of these things and never once left with anyone, Cass said. Not even someone she knew going in. She probably intimidates everyone, Jordan or Joel said. Or she's just picky, Diane offered, which was the most charitable reading in the room. Marcus said she turned down 3 separate introductions at the Meridian fundraiser last spring, Cass continued. She had clearly done research. And at the Bellamy Foundation thing in August, the guy her assistant set her up with lasted like 45 minutes before he made an excuse to leave. What was his excuse? The other one of Jordan Joel asked. Said he had an early morning. Cass gave a look that communicated exactly what she thought about that. He was a regional sales director. He didn't have an early morning. It was at this point that Nathan, who had successfully refilled his thermos and should have left, made the mistake of asking, so what's actually wrong with her? The room got very quiet in a very specific way. The way rooms get quiet when someone has accidentally walked into a conversation they have opinions about, but that everyone else has already finished having. Marcus looked at him. Wrong with her? You're all talking about her like she's some kind of problem to solve. I'm asking what's actually going on with her that makes people leave. She's just a lot, Cass said finally, like in every sense. She's extremely successful, she's extremely direct, she's clearly extremely smart, and I think most guys just get in there and realize pretty fast that they can't keep up, and they'd rather leave than admit that. That's not a flaw, Nathan said. That's other people's problem. Another silence. Slightly different texture this time. Marcus got a look on his face that Nathan had seen before and instinctively distrusted. You know what? Marcus said slowly. I actually have a thought. Don't, Nathan said. Hear me out. I know what your thoughts look like, Marcus. I've seen them before. The answer is no. You haven't even heard, I'm going back to work. He picked up his thermos. Please don't finish that sentence. He made it as far as the hallway before Marcus caught up with him. The thing was, Marcus wasn't stupid. That was the problem. If Marcus were stupid, his pitches would be easy to dismiss. Instead, he had a way of framing things that found the exact gap between what you wanted to believe about yourself and what you were actually doing, and he wedged the argument right into that gap and left it there. She's coming to the gala, Marcus said, keeping pace with Nathan down the service corridor. My buddy at Ashford's PR firm says she's been talking about wanting to meet people outside her industry, normal people. She's tired of being set up with venture capitalists and other tech guys. That's very interesting information that has nothing to do with me. You're a normal person. I'm also a maintenance technician with a 7-year-old and no interest in being someone's experiment and meeting quote-unquote normal people. That's not what this is. Isn't it? Marcus was quiet for 3 steps. Okay, maybe a little. But also, when's the last time you went on a date, Nathan? The corridor was quiet except for the sound of a laundry cart being pushed somewhere on the floor below. Nathan kept walking. I'm not asking to be mean, Marcus said. I'm asking because I've worked with you for 2 years, and in 2 years I have never once heard you mention going anywhere with anyone. You work. You go home to Lily. You work some more. You're 32 years old. I'm aware of my age. Then act like it. Marcus stopped walking, which meant Nathan either had to stop too or keep going and make it look like he was running away, which was not something his pride would allow. He stopped. Look, I'm not saying marry the woman. I'm saying have dinner, one dinner, with another adult human being who, by all accounts, is interesting and decent and just happens to have more money than everyone in this building combined. The money part is exactly why this is a bad idea. Why? Because I'd spend the whole time feeling like I was auditioning for something. Or, Marcus said, you'd spend it just talking to someone new, which is a thing you used to do before. He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Nathan looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain near the light fixture that he'd marked for repair 2 weeks ago and hadn't gotten back to. He made a mental note. One dinner, Marcus said. Worst case, you have a bad meal and a story. You're not going to let this go. I'm going to absolutely not let this go. Nathan stood there for another few seconds, doing the thing he did when he was calculating whether a repair was worth the time and materials or whether it was going to open up a larger problem once he got into it. He'd learned over the years that sometimes you had to just open the wall and see what was in there. Leaving things sealed didn't mean they weren't deteriorating. Fine, he said. One dinner. Marcus's face broke into the grin of a man who had been confident about the outcome of this conversation for considerably longer than Nathan had been having it. I'll set it up. Don't make it weird, Marcus. I would never. You always make it weird. This time will be different. It wasn't different. By the following Thursday, half the hotel staff knew about it. Nathan found out when Diane stopped him in the hallway outside laundry and asked if he needed to borrow a nice jacket for the occasion. He owned a nice jacket. He'd worn it to Lily's kindergarten concert, and before that to a funeral, and before that he couldn't remember. But the fact that Diane knew meant Cass knew, which meant both Jordan and Joel knew, which meant it had fully escaped the bounds of the break room and was now ambient information in the building. He thought about calling it off for approximately 48 hours. He didn't call it off. Mostly because doing so would have required explaining himself to Marcus. And explaining himself to Marcus was its own kind of exhausting. The restaurant Marcus chose was called Linden & Co., the kind of place with cloth napkins and a sommelier who introduced himself and meant it, where the menu was printed in a font small enough that you needed reading glasses or confidence, and where the lighting was specifically designed to make everyone look slightly more attractive than they actually were. Nathan arrived 7 minutes early, which was the same amount of time he allowed himself for every appointment, because arriving too early made you look anxious, and arriving late made you look careless. He was shown to a table near the back. Corner booth, good sight lines, away from the main foot traffic. He wondered if Marcus had requested that, or if it was standard practice for a restaurant like this when hosting someone whose face was recognizable. He ordered water, looked at the menu without really seeing it, became aware that he was sitting up very straight and made a deliberate effort to relax his shoulders, which helped somewhat. Victoria Ashford arrived at 1 minute past 7. He knew it was her before the host brought her over, not because he recognized her from photos, though he did, but because of the way the room shifted when she walked in. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, the way a slight change in air pressure is subtle. A few heads turned. A few conversations paused. She moved through the restaurant without acknowledging any of it, her expression composed, her posture the kind you develop either from deliberate effort or from spending years under constant observation and deciding to stop letting it bend you. She was wearing a dark green dress, simple cut, no jewelry, except small earrings he couldn't quite see from across the room. Her hair was down. She looked exactly like her photographs and completely unlike them at the same time, in the way that people always do when you see them in person for the first time. She spotted him before the host had finished leading her to the table. He could see the small recalibration in her expression as she registered that he'd already arrived and was already looking at her, not down at his phone or away across the room the way people sometimes looked when they were pretending they hadn't been watching. He met her eyes, nodded once. She nodded back. The host pulled out her chair. She sat down and thanked him by name. She'd clearly looked at his name tag in the 30 seconds since walking in, and the host seemed surprised and pleased in a way that told Nathan it didn't happen often. "You're Nathan," she said. Not a question. "I am. You're Victoria." "I am." She picked up her menu, glanced at it, set it back down. "Did Marcus threaten you into this, or did you actually agree voluntarily?" Nathan's mouth twitched despite himself. He made a compelling argument. "He told me you needed to get out of the house." She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way someone says something when they've been told a version of the truth and are trying to figure out how much of it is real. "He told me you were a good person, and that I had a habit of only meeting people who wanted something from me, and that you were specifically the kind of person who didn't want anything." That's a strange thing to recommend someone for. I thought so too. She tilted her head slightly. "Do you? Want something?" "Dinner," Nathan said. "I'm actually hungry. I haven't eaten since noon." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, a real one, short and sudden, like it had caught her off guard. "Okay," she said, and picked up her menu again. "Let's eat. Well, the bread came first." That was the thing about first dates in restaurants. There was always the bread question, which was a small but revealing negotiation. Some people attacked it immediately, which meant they were comfortable. Some people waited until the other person moved first, which meant they were watching for cues. Some people said they weren't going to have any, and then had some anyway, which meant something Nathan had never fully articulated. Victoria took a piece without ceremony, tore off a section, and ate it. She was mid-bite when she looked up and caught him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing. I was just trying to figure you out." "In the first 4 minutes? I'm efficient." "And? What have you figured out?" "Not enough," he said. He reached for the bread. "What did they tell you about me?" "That you're a maintenance technician at the Hargrove Grand. That you have a daughter named Lily, who's 7. That you've been on your own for—" She paused, and he saw her decide something about phrasing. "For a while. And that you're very quiet, but not in a way that means there's nothing going on." Marcus said that last part? Diane said that last part. Apparently she's been watching you work for 2 years. Nathan wasn't sure if he should be alarmed or touched. He settled on something in between. "What do you do when people tell you a lot about someone before you meet them?" Victoria considered the question. "I try to throw it out. People describe other people through their own filters. What Marcus thinks is noteworthy about you, and what's actually noteworthy about you are probably 2 different lists. That's a smart way to approach it. I've had to be. People decide who I am before I say a word. I stopped trusting other people's summaries a long time ago." The sommelier materialized and asked about wine. Nathan said water was fine. Victoria asked what they had that was interesting, listened to the answer, and ordered a glass of something he didn't catch the name of. When the sommelier left, she looked at Nathan with an expression that wasn't quite an apology. "I can order separately," she said. "Financially. I want to be clear about that up front, because otherwise it becomes the thing hanging over the whole dinner." That's the most direct thing anyone's ever said to me at a restaurant. "Is it a problem?" "No," he said. "It's actually kind of a relief." She smiled at that, different from the earlier laugh. Smaller, more private, like she'd expected a different answer and was quietly revising something. Most men find it offensive, or they say it's fine and then spend the rest of the night being weird about it. I'm not going to be weird about it. Good. She picked up her menu again. "So tell me something about Lily." He didn't expect the pivot, and maybe that was the point. "She's in a triceratops phase," he said, very serious about it. "I know more about dinosaur frill anatomy than I ever intended to." "What have you learned?" "More than I wanted to. Less than she wants me to know. She keeps quizzing me at breakfast and looking genuinely disappointed when I get things wrong. She sounds like someone who has standards. She has extremely high standards. For a 7-year-old, she is frankly unreasonable." Victoria was grinning now, and it changed her face in a way that the magazine photographs had never managed to capture. The images he'd seen of her, the Forbes cover, the conference keynote shots, the occasional red carpet appearance, all showed a woman who was composed, poised, projecting exactly the level of authority the situation required. That was one version of her. This was something else, less curated, more actual. She sounds like she's doing great, Victoria said. She is. He meant it simply, the way a person means something when they don't need to perform it. She's the thing I'm getting right. A silence settled between them, not an uncomfortable one. What about you? He asked. What do people usually get wrong about you? First impressions, I mean. She took a sip of her wine, set the glass down carefully, lining it up with the condensation ring it had already left on the cloth. They usually assume I'm managing them, she said. Like every question I ask is strategic and every answer I give is calculated. People in business meetings do it. People at events do it. People on... She gestured between them. Situations like this. Are you? Managing me? Not right now. She picked up her fork, seemed to realize there was no food to use it on yet, and set it back. When I'm managing someone, it feels a certain way. This doesn't feel that way. What does it feel like? She thought about it. Like I don't know what's coming next, she said, which is rarer than it sounds. Somewhere around the main course, Nathan noticed the table two over. It was a couple, mid-40s, the woman in pearls and the man in a jacket that cost more than Nathan made in 2 weeks, which wasn't a judgment, just an observation, the kind he made automatically about everything. They'd been glancing over intermittently since Victoria sat down. Not constantly, not enough to be obviously rude, but enough that Nathan had tracked it the way he tracked anything that repeated. Victoria had noticed it too. He could see it in the slight shift of her posture when a glance landed, the barely perceptible way her spine straightened and her expression held a fraction longer than it needed to. She never broke the conversation. She never acknowledged it directly. She had clearly, over years, developed the ability to continue functioning normally while being watched, the way you learn to sleep in a house that makes noise. But there was something underneath it that she hadn't managed to make invisible, a kind of tiredness that wasn't physical. Does that bother you? He asked, nodding fractionally in the direction of the other table. She followed his look without making it obvious, looked back at him. I'm used to it. That's not what I asked. A beat. Yes, she said. It bothers me. Not the looking, She searched for the word. The assumption behind the looking, like they're trying to figure out what the story is, what the reason is that someone like me is here. Someone like you. You know what I mean. I want to hear how you'd say it. She turned her wine glass slowly, a quarter rotation. Successful women who don't fit whatever the expected shape is make people uncomfortable, especially in rooms like this one, where everyone has a type and a role and you're supposed to slot into one of them. She paused. I never quite slot. Did you ever want to? When I was younger, I thought I did. She said it without self-pity, just as a fact. I spent a lot of energy trying to be more, approachable, less. Like if I just turned down the volume a little, people would be more comfortable. Did it work? No. And I lost about 3 years trying. She said it flatly. Then I decided that was 3 years I wasn't getting back, and I stopped. Nathan looked at her. She was watching him with the particular attention of someone who has said something real and is now quietly calculating whether it was the right call. Good, he said. Good? Turning down the volume, deciding not to. She was quiet for a moment. Most people say something like, well, I'm sure you found a balance, or I'm sure people came around. I'm not going to say either of those things. Why not? Because I don't know if people came around. And finding a balance sounds like something you say when you want to smooth over something without actually engaging with it. He picked up his water glass. You made a decision about how much of yourself you were willing to shrink for other people's comfort. That's not a problem that needed a solution. The table with the pearl necklace and the expensive jacket had stopped glancing over. Nathan wasn't sure if they'd lost interest or if the conversation had absorbed him enough that he'd stopped tracking them. Victoria was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not surprised, exactly. More like she was remeasuring something she'd already measured once and getting a different number the second time. Marcus said you were quiet, she said. I am quiet. He meant it as a compliment. I thought it meant you didn't have much to say. And now? She reached for her wine. Now I think you're quiet because you're actually paying attention. The dessert menus came and went. The restaurant thinned out slowly around them. Nathan checked his watch at one point, not because he wanted to leave, but because Mrs. Okafor had a standing limit of 10:30, and it was 20 past, and he needed to be present for that information. He registered that it had been 2 hours and 12 minutes since Victoria sat down, which meant the bread had arrived roughly 2 hours and 8 minutes ago, which meant they'd been talking for more than 2 hours without him noticing the time pass in any meaningful way. That didn't happen to him often. Actually, it didn't happen to him at all in recent memory. Victoria noticed him look at the watch. "Do you need to go?" "In a few minutes. My neighbor has a limit." "Lily?" "She'd stay up until midnight if I let her. Mrs. Okafor has a firmer philosophy." Victoria nodded slowly. There was something moving across her face that she seemed to be deciding whether or not to say. He waited. "I almost canceled tonight," she said. 2 days ago. I told my assistant to draft the message, and then I sat with it for an hour and didn't send it." "Why did you almost cancel?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I've had versions of this before. Not often. I don't actually do this often, but enough times that I know how they usually go. Someone gets excited about the idea of me, and then they meet the actual me, and there's a gap between those two things, and people don't always know what to do with the gap. What made you not send the message?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant, through the tall front windows, the street was wet from earlier rain. Headlights moved through the water on the pavement. "I couldn't think of a good reason," she said finally. "And I've gotten very good at distinguishing between real reasons and reasons I'm making up because I'm tired of trying." Nathan left cash for his portion, tucked his jacket over his arm, and stood. He offered his hand across the table, not for a handshake exactly, more the gesture of it. She took it briefly. "Thank you for not sending the message," he said. She looked up at him. Something in her face settled. Not into happiness, not into certainty, but into something quieter than either of those things. Possibility, maybe. Or just the absence of the weight she'd been carrying into the room. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." He didn't tell Marcus much. That was partly deliberate, and partly because Marcus asked too many questions too fast, and Nathan had learned that the best way to handle that particular conversational style was to answer the least interesting question in the sequence and let the rest go unanswered. So when Marcus found him in the utility corridor the next morning and said, "Well, how was it? What's she like? Did you like her? Are you going again?" Nathan said, "The food was good," and kept walking. Marcus followed him for approximately 40 feet before giving up. The truth was that Nathan wasn't sure yet what to do with the previous evening. Not because it had gone badly, it hadn't, in ways that were still settling somewhere in the back of his chest, but because it had gone differently than he'd expected, and he needed a little time with that before he started talking about it. I was like that with most things. He needed to sit with something before he could characterize it accurately. Rushing to describe an experience before you'd actually processed it was how you ended up saying the wrong thing about something that mattered. And something about the previous evening mattered, though he was still working out exactly what and in what proportion. He thought about the way she'd said, "I almost canceled," and the particular quality of the silence that had followed it. Not a confessional silence, not the kind where someone is waiting for you to reassure them, just honest. Like she'd said a true thing because it was true, and not because she wanted anything from saying it. That was rarer than it should have been. He thought about the table with the pearl necklace and the expensive jacket, and the way Victoria's spine had moved when their eyes passed over her, and the way she'd still held the conversation like nothing was pulling at her from the outside, even though he could see it was. He fixed 2 leaking faucets, replaced a thermostat sensor on the 3rd floor, and spent 40 minutes tracing an intermittent electrical fault in the hotel restaurant's south kitchen, and through all of it, the evening sat in the back of his mind like a room he hadn't finished looking at. By Thursday of the following week, he'd texted her once, just to say the dinner had been good and that he'd be willing to do it again if she was. He sent it at 7:45 in the morning, which was not a calculated time. It was just when he happened to be sitting down with his coffee before Lily woke up, and the thought surfaced, and he'd learned over the years that ignoring thoughts that surfaced during quiet moments was a reliable way to regret them later. She responded 40 minutes later. "Same. Are you free Saturday?" He checked the calendar on his phone, which was mostly Lily's schedule arranged around his shifts. Saturday was a half day. Mrs. Okafor had already offered to take Lily to her granddaughter's birthday party in the afternoon, which Lily had been talking about for 2 weeks because apparently the granddaughter had a trampoline. Saturday works, he wrote back. There's a place I like in the Meridian district. Lunch, not dinner. Less pressure. He smiled at his coffee. Less pressure. As though dinner at Linden and Cumberry had felt like pressure to her. He supposed it had, though maybe not in the way she meant. Lunch is fine. Fine, he wrote. Send me the name. She sent it, then added, Don't look it up beforehand. I want to see your face when you walk in. He didn't look it up. He was a little curious about what his face was going to do. The place was called Oleander, and it was not what he'd expected from a woman whose net worth had 7 digits to the left of the decimal point. It occupied the ground floor of a converted brick building in a neighborhood that was in the process of becoming something other than what it had been for the previous 30 years. Old storefronts mixed with new signage, scaffolding on 2 buildings across the street, a dry cleaner next to an artisanal coffee roaster that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never needed to worry about rent. Oleander itself had 8 tables, mismatched chairs, a menu written on a large chalkboard behind the counter, and the kind of noise level that came from the walls being bare brick and the ceiling being high and the clientele not caring about being overheard. Victoria was already there. She was at a table by the window, corner seat, back to the wall, with a coffee she'd clearly been working on for a few minutes, and a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, folded to a crossword puzzle that she appeared to be doing in pen. She looked up when he came in, and something in her expression loosened slightly, the way it does when you've been waiting for something and it arrives. You didn't look it up, she said. You can tell? You've got the face of someone who doesn't know what to make of this place yet. He sat down across from her. It's not what I expected. Good. She folded the newspaper and set it aside. What did you expect? Something that had a sommelier. I only go there when I'm trying to impress someone. She said it with a perfectly straight face. He couldn't tell for a half second if she meant it. Then she added, or when someone else is paying. Who paid last time? Marcus, technically. He made a reservation with the company card and then pretended it was his idea. She picked up her coffee. I let him have it. He seemed pleased with himself. Nathan looked at the chalkboard. The menu was seasonal, handwritten in 2 colors of chalk, with approximately 12 items and no descriptions that used the word artisanal. How long have you been coming here? 3 years, maybe 4. She paused. I used to come here when the company was still in the warehouse, before everything got bigger. She said bigger in a way that indicated the word was doing some heavy lifting. It was easier to think here. The noise is the right kind. He understood what she meant. There was a difference between noise that invaded and noise that insulated. The second kind created a perimeter. You could have a private conversation in a loud room if the noise was distributed correctly. A server came. He ordered coffee and whatever the daily lunch special was without asking what it was, because the chalkboard said it was good, and he trusted chalkboards over menus that over-explained themselves. Victoria ordered the same thing she'd apparently ordered dozens of times before. He could tell by the way the server wrote it down without confirming and left without ceremony. No performance on either end, just a transaction between 2 people who knew the routine. Tell me something about the company, he said when the server had gone. Not the version you tell investors, the actual version. She looked at him. Why? Because you mentioned the warehouse. I want to know what that was like. She was quiet for a moment, and he could see her deciding whether to give him the polished answer or the real one. He waited. Cold, she said finally. It was genuinely, physically cold. We had 2 space heaters and a lease that didn't include utilities, and in December of the second year I wore my coat inside for 6 weeks because we were trying to save money on the heating bill. She said it without nostalgia, just as fact. There were 4 of us at that point. Me, my first hire, a guy named Daniel, who is now my CTO, a graphic designer named Petra, who left after 18 months for a bigger firm, and I don't blame her, and an intern who was getting college credit and absolutely had not anticipated spending his semester in an unheated warehouse in December. What kept you going? I didn't have a plan B. She said it immediately, like it wasn't something she'd ever had to search for. I don't mean that in an inspirational poster kind of way. I mean, literally, I had put everything I had into the company, and there was nothing else. Walking away would have meant starting completely over at something I didn't know, and I was already good at this, even when it was hard. I've always believed that being good at something is worth something, even when the evidence is temporarily against you. Temporarily. I had to believe it was temporary. She turned her coffee cup. If I'd let myself believe it might not be, I would have stopped. The food came, a grain bowl with roasted vegetables and a soft egg, and some kind of dressing that had herbs in it he couldn't identify. He ate it the way he always ate, with actual attention, not as something to do while talking. Victoria did the same. For a few minutes, the conversation paused, and neither of them seemed bothered by that, which he noted without analyzing it too much. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "At the restaurant last week, people are harder. People are unpredictable. People are unpredictable, and they also decide who you are before you open your mouth, which means you're constantly managing someone else's version of you at the same time you're trying to just have a conversation." She said it without edge, just tiredly. "It's exhausting. I didn't realize how exhausting until recently." "What happened recently?" She looked back at him. "I hired a communications consultant. Very well regarded, very expensive, and she spent 3 sessions essentially coaching me on how to soften my presence so that people in meetings would feel less challenged by me." She paused. "I fired her after the 3rd session." "What did she say when you told her?" "She said I was self-sabotaging." "What did you say?" "I said that changing who I was in order to make less competent people comfortable was not something I was willing to call growth." She said it levelly. She didn't have a response for that. Nathan finished his coffee. Outside, the dog walker and the dog had negotiated some kind of truce and were proceeding together at a more reasonable pace. "For what it's worth," he said, "you seem pretty easy to be around." She turned back to him. "You're not in a meeting with me." "True. Are you different in meetings?" "Yes." No hesitation. "How?" She considered. "More direct, less patient with circular conversations. I ask for the bottom line faster than people expect, and some people read that as impatience when it's actually just, 'I've heard the setup before. I already know the setup. Tell me what you're trying to tell me.' That doesn't sound like a personality flaw. Tell that to the 4 board members who think I need to learn to read the room better. Maybe the room needs to change its standards." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed again, that short, surprised laugh, the same one from last week. He was starting to think that that laugh was the most accurate thing about her, the thing that came out when she wasn't managing anything. "You keep saying things like that," she said. "Things like what?" "Things that are just," she searched for it, "obvious, but that nobody says. Like you see the obvious thing, and you say it, and I'm sitting here wondering why it took someone actually saying it. I don't have a lot of patience for dancing around things. Bad habit, maybe. Or a good one, depending on who you're talking to." She looked at him. "I think I've been in rooms my whole career where the dancing was more important than the thing being danced around. Those are bad rooms. Most rooms are bad rooms in that sense." She pulled the newspaper back toward her, didn't open it. "What about you? What's your version of the bad room?" He thought about it. "Grief groups," he said. She didn't move, but something in her face went still. "After my wife died," he said, "friends and family kept suggesting I go. And I went twice, because you try the things people suggest when you're not sure what you're doing, and both times what I found was a room full of people talking around the actual thing. Very careful language. Very structured, and I understood why. I understood that some people needed the structure to be able to say anything at all." He looked at his empty bowl. "But I'm not built that way. I needed to actually look at the thing, and those rooms weren't designed for that." "What did you do instead?" "Went to work, raised Lily, talked to a guy I used to know who'd been through something similar. He's not around anymore, moved cities. But for about a year we'd have coffee once a week and just talk about it straight. No structure, just, here's what it was like this week. That sounds more useful. For me it was. For someone else maybe not." He shrugged slightly. "I think we spend a lot of time trying to apply universal solutions to things that aren't universal." "The communications consultant would have told you to join the grief group." "Probably. She would have said it builds community and demonstrates emotional openness." "I have community. Lily's 7 and she quizzes me about triceratopses at breakfast. That's community." Victoria smiled at that. The slow, real one, not the polished public version. "How long ago did you lose her?" she asked. "If that's okay to ask." 4 years, he said. Lily was 3.
That's young for both of you. Yeah. He didn't add anything to that. It was the kind of thing that didn't benefit from being expanded. 4 years ago, Lily was 3, and the world had reconfigured itself into something he didn't recognize and had to learn to live in from the beginning. He'd done that. He was still doing that, in the particular ongoing way of things that don't finish, they just get more integrated. Victoria seemed to understand that he'd said what he was going to say on the subject, and she moved on the way someone does when they respect the boundary without making a thing of respecting it. Does Lily know you went on a date last week? She knows I went to dinner with someone. And? She asked if the someone had a dog. Victoria blinked. A dog? She's been lobbying for a dog for 8 months.
She's now incorporated the question into initial assessments of new people. Do you have a dog? No. Was she disappointed? She took it in stride. She said, and I'm quoting, "That's okay. She can still be nice." Victoria's smile spread wide, and for a moment she just sat there with it, not saying anything. Then, "She sounds like someone I'd actually like to meet." He said, "Maybe." Because he meant it as something that was possible, not something that was certain yet. He was careful about that. He'd learned to be. They stayed at Oleander for almost 2 hours. At some point, the lunch crowd thinned out, and the afternoon light came in lower through the front window, and a new round of coffee arrived without either of them having asked for it. Victoria had clearly been here enough times that this was just something that happened. He stopped being surprised by it after the first cup. The conversation moved in the way good conversations move, without following a clear path. They talked about the city and the neighborhoods that were changing and whether that was inherently good or bad or just inevitable. They talked about work, his, in the practical sense, what it meant to know how a building functioned from the inside out. The satisfaction of understanding systems well enough to know before they failed. She was genuinely interested in that, not in a polite way, but in the way she leaned forward when he explained how he'd traced the electrical fault in the hotel kitchen, asking questions that suggested she was actually tracking the logic rather than waiting for him to finish. He talked about the way maintenance work was essentially problem-solving with physical consequences, which made it different from most other kinds of problem-solving. She talked about the way her own work had evolved from pure creativity, building campaigns, designing platforms, into something more structural, more about systems and sustainability than about individual ideas. "I miss the ideas part sometimes," she said. "When it was small enough that I was still in every decision, I knew what we were making in real time. Now I'm 3 layers removed from the actual work, and sometimes that feels like a loss. You could change it. People keep telling me the company is too big for that now. Is it?" She thought about it. "Probably not. Probably I just haven't made it a priority because the structural stuff is where the problems are, and the creative stuff is where things feel good, and I've trained myself to go where the problems are." She paused. "Which means I spend most of my time in problems and not much time in things that feel good." That sounds like a design flaw. It is. She said it without defensiveness. "I'm aware of it. I just haven't fixed it yet." "Why not?" "Because fixing it requires trusting other people to handle the problems, and She stopped. Started again. "I have specific ideas about how things should be handled, and I've been burned enough times by handing something off and having it come back wrong that I find it hard to let go." Control. "Yes, I know. I'm working on it. I'm not criticizing it. I know. You have a very neutral way of naming things." She looked at him. "Most people either validate or critique. You just name it and leave it there. Usually, criticism only helps when someone's asking for it. And when they're not, then it's just you making noise about someone else's choices." She shook her head slightly, in a way that wasn't disagreement, more like she was turning something over. "You'd be a terrible consultant. I'd be a terrible a lot of things, but an excellent maintenance technician. I'm very good at it," he said, and he said it simply, the same way he'd said Lily was the thing he was getting right, without performance, just as a fact he'd made peace with. She seemed to notice that. She seemed to notice most things. It was almost 3 when he stood up. He had to pick up Lily from the birthday party by 4, and the drive took 20 minutes, and he needed to stop for groceries because they were out of the butter for pasta. "I'll get this," Victoria said, reaching for the check. "We said we'd do it separately." "I know, I changed my mind." She didn't say it like a power move. She said it like someone making a small practical decision. I picked this place because nobody charges me for sitting here 2 hours. The least I can do is buy the second round of coffees. He let it go. Not because he felt outmaneuvered, but because the argument wasn't worth making, and she was right that they'd been there a long time. Outside, the afternoon was cool and clear, the scaffolding across the street catching the light in a specific way that made the shadows interesting. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, which was the transitional pause of an afternoon that had run longer than intended and wasn't sure how to conclude itself. This was better than last week, she said. Why? Last week I was performing a little. Not much, but some. Today I wasn't. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. I'm not sure if that's because of the restaurant or because of you. Probably both. Probably. She tucked her hands into her jacket pockets. I want to be honest with you about something. Okay. I don't do this often, not because I don't want to. I do want to, I think. I've just been through enough versions of it going wrong that I've gotten cautious. Which I know sounds ironic from someone who's supposed to be this fearless businesswoman, but the fearless businesswoman thing is… She stopped. It's real, but it's contextual. Personally, I am considerably more cautious. I know, he said. You know? You said you almost canceled. Cautious people almost cancel. She looked at him for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something to her expression that made it hard to read, or maybe it was just that her expression was doing something she wasn't entirely directing. I didn't cancel, though, she said. No, he said. You didn't. A cab went by. Someone on a bicycle navigated around a delivery crate left on the sidewalk. The ordinary afternoon continued around them like it had no particular opinion about what was happening. Saturday after next, she said, there's a market in the Callaway neighborhood, open early. I usually go around 9 before it gets crowded. A market. Produce, mostly. Some other things. I'm not suggesting anything elaborate. I'm suggesting a market at 9 in the morning because it's a thing I actually do, and it seemed easier than trying to plan something. Can I bring Lily? He asked. The question surprised her. He could see it in the slight widening of her eyes, quickly managed. He wasn't sure what she'd been expecting. Maybe more caution on his end, maybe more pacing. But he'd thought about it on the drive over, and he'd decided that introducing unnecessary distance between the parts of his life was not something he was interested in doing. Lily was the largest part of his life. If this was going to be anything, and he wasn't saying it was, but if it was going to have to exist in the same world as his daughter, not immediately, not as something big and weighted, but as something real. A market in the morning was small enough to be fine. If she wants to come, Victoria said, and her voice was careful but not closed. I don't want her to feel like she has to be there. She'll want to come. She goes everywhere. He paused. Fair warning. She may ask if you have a dog before she asks your name. Victoria smiled. I'll have an answer ready. Do you have a dog? No. She'll take it in stride. She's decided you can still be nice. Victoria laughed. The full one this time, not the short surprised one, and not the polished public one, but something in between that was probably the closest thing to what she actually sounded like when she wasn't watching herself at all. He walked to his car. He didn't look back, not because he didn't want to, but because he'd gotten into the habit of moving forward when he was going somewhere, not checking what was behind him. It was a thing he'd had to train himself into in the years after Claire died, and it had become a reflex now. He drove to the grocery store, got the butter, got a few other things Lily had mentioned at breakfast, and then drove to the birthday party to pick her up. She came out with streamers in her hair and frosting on her left sleeve and an extremely detailed account of the trampoline that lasted the entire drive home. Did you have a good afternoon? She asked eventually, wedging it in between trampoline details. Yeah, he said. I did. Did the person you had lunch with have a dog? No dog. Does she want one? He thought about it. I didn't ask. You should ask, Lily said with the authority of someone who had already decided how she felt about this. That's important information. I'll put it on the list, Nathan said. She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to telling him about the trampoline, and he drove through the afternoon traffic with both hands on the wheel and the easy, specific weight of his daughter's voice filling up the car. And something in the day sat right in a way that several previous days had not. I wasn't in a hurry about any of it. He'd learned not to be, in the same hard way he'd learned most things, while it was happening to him, without the benefit of knowing what came next. But he wasn't not interested either. That was, he'd decided somewhere between the grocery store and the birthday party. Probably enough for now. The Callaway market opened at 8, but the serious regulars arrived by 8:15, when the good vendors still had their full stock and the crowds hadn't yet compressed the aisles into something requiring patience. Nathan didn't always have before his second coffee. Victoria was already there when he arrived at 9:05, standing at a stall selling late-season squash with a canvas tote over one shoulder and a coffee from somewhere nearby that was already half gone. She was wearing jeans and a dark gray jacket, and she looked, more than on either of the previous two occasions, like a person who existed in the world without being watched. Or maybe she'd just gotten better at pretending that was true. Lily spotted her first. This was partly because Lily spotted everything first. She had the observational range of a small radar system, and partly because Nathan had described Victoria enough that Lily had apparently constructed a fairly specific mental image and was running a facial match against incoming data without being asked. "Is that her?" Lily said, not quietly. "That's her." "She's pretty." "Yep." "Does she know we're here yet?" "She's about to." Victoria had already looked up from the squash. She'd clocked them the same way Nathan clocked things, which was to say early and without making a production of it. She raised a hand in a small wave. Lily waved back with considerably more enthusiasm and then pulled ahead on Nathan's hand until he let go, and she walked the last 15 feet at a pace that was technically not running. "Hi," Lily said, stopping in front of Victoria with the unself-conscious directness of someone who had not yet learned to find other people intimidating. "I'm Lily. Do you have a dog?" Victoria looked down at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. "I don't," she said. "I've thought about it, but my apartment isn't really set up for one." Lily considered this seriously. "What kind were you thinking?" "Something medium-sized, not too loud." "Labs are loud," Lily said with the authority of someone who had done research. "My friend Emma has one, and it barks at the mailbox every single day like it's never seen a mailbox before." "That sounds exhausting." "For the dog too, probably." Lily seemed to conclude that the dog question had been adequately addressed and shifted without transition. "My dad says you built a company." "I did." "From nothing?" "Pretty close to nothing, yeah." Lily turned this over. "My dad fixes things," she said. "Buildings and stuff. He says it's the same as building things, but backwards." She looked at Victoria with the particular evaluative attention of a 7-year-old who has decided this is a situation worth assessing carefully. "I think that's a smart way to think about it." Victoria glanced at Nathan over Lily's head. He gave her nothing. This was her introduction to his daughter. She could navigate it on her own terms. "I think that's a very smart way to think about it," Victoria said. Lily nodded, satisfied. "Can I have a squash?" she asked Nathan. We don't need a squash." "But can I have one?" "Why do you want a squash?" "I want to see how heavy it is." Nathan looked at the vendor, who was trying not to smile. He bought a small butternut squash for reasons he chose not to examine too closely, and Lily carried it in both hands for the next 20 minutes, like it was a trophy. The market was 4 long aisles of vendor stalls inside a converted rail depot that smelled of sawdust and cut flowers, and something faintly savory from a stall near the east entrance that was doing a strong business in breakfast sandwiches. Lily was immediately interested in everything and wanted to stop at approximately 80% of the stalls, which meant the pace of their progress was closer to a survey than a walk. Victoria, to her credit, did not appear to find this irritating. She matched Lily's pace without effort, stopped when Lily stopped, answered questions when Lily asked them, and did not once produce the particular expression Nathan had seen on other adults, the slightly strained smile that communicated tolerance rather than actual interest. She asked Lily things back. Not performing interest, just curious, the way she'd been curious at dinner when he'd talked about the electrical fault in the kitchen. At a stall selling seed packets and small potted herbs, Lily spent 4 minutes explaining to Victoria the difference between a Triceratops and a Styracosaurus, which was a subgenre of her Triceratops expertise that Nathan hadn't heard articulated before. Victoria listened, asked 2 specific follow-up questions that Nathan was pretty sure required some baseline understanding of late Cretaceous fauna, and said, "I always thought Triceratops got undersold. Like everyone knows T-Rex, but nobody talks about what actually took them on." Lily went completely still for a moment. Then she turned to Nathan with an expression of profound vindication. She gets it, Lily said. I see that, Nathan said. I like her, Lily announced to the immediate vicinity. The herb vendor, who had been listening to all of this, said Triceratops was seriously underrated, and Lily decided she also liked the herb vendor, and Nathan bought 2 small basil plants he didn't have a clear plan for because that seemed like the right response to the situation. They got coffee, Nathan and Victoria, while Lily investigated a stall selling wooden toys with a seriousness that bordered on professional, and stood near the east entrance where the morning light came through the old rail depot windows in long, slanted bars, and the crowd was thin enough to have a conversation at a normal volume. She's not what I expected, Victoria said. What did you expect? I'm not sure. Quieter, maybe? More watchful. She's watchful. She just talks while she's doing it. She asked me 4 questions before she knew my name. She front-loads the important stuff. Nathan drank his coffee. The name comes when she's decided you're worth knowing. Victoria looked over at Lily, who was holding a small wooden puzzle and frowning at it with intense concentration. She told me I get it, she said. About Triceratops, that felt… She paused. Like being admitted to something. She doesn't say that to everyone. I know, that's why it felt like something. She looked at him sideways. Is this strange? I feel like this might be strange. Telling you that your 7-year-old made me feel included. It's not strange. You're sure? Lily's approval is not easy to get. You should take it seriously. She smiled at her coffee cup. Not the polished one. The real one. Duly noted. They were quiet for a moment, and it was the same quality of quiet as the restaurant in Oleander, the kind that didn't require filling. Lily had put down the wooden puzzle and moved on to a stall that appeared to sell handmade notebooks, which she was now examining with the same intensity she'd brought to the puzzle. Can I ask you something personal? Nathan said. You can ask. The thing you said at lunch, about being through enough versions of it going wrong. What went wrong? She looked out at the market for a moment. When she turned back, her expression was considered. There have been 3 serious ones, she said, not counting things that didn't get off the ground. 3 that I thought were real. He waited. The first one was before the company was anything. When I was still in the warehouse, still struggling. He was kind and he was patient, and I thought that meant he was in it with me. He wasn't. When things started working, when the company started actually being something, he got… She chose the word carefully. Smaller. Not immediately. Gradually. Like my success was a thing happening to him rather than something he could be adjacent to. We lasted 14 months from the first date. A pause. He's married now. Seems happy. I don't think he's a bad person. I just think he needed someone whose life was configured in a way that didn't ask him to reckon with himself. And the second one? Second one was the opposite problem. He was very successful himself, very confident, and the issue was that he was interested in the idea of me more than the actual me. Like I was an acquisition, a good match on paper, good press, complementary brands. She said this with a flatness that told him she'd processed it well past the point of it being painful and into the place where it was just something that happened. He never asked me a question that wasn't instrumental, not once. Everything was angled at something. How long did that take to see? Too long. Almost 8 months before I admitted it to myself. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The cup was paper, and she'd been slowly working a small crease into the rim without appearing to notice. I kept telling myself I was reading it wrong, that I was being too cynical. You weren't being too cynical. No, but the alternative was admitting that I'd spent 8 months with someone who didn't actually see me, and that was harder to sit with than telling myself I was wrong about him. Nathan thought about that. He understood it. The version of that he'd experienced was different in texture, but similar in structure. The way you hold a difficult truth at arm's length because looking at it directly meant everything that came before it looked different too. Third one, he said. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might choose not to answer. Then, third one is the one I don't talk about usually. You don't have to. I know. She looked at Lily, who had moved on again and was now examining a stall of hand-thrown ceramics, with a vendor who was explaining the glazing process to her in what appeared to be genuine detail. He was the realest one. That's the most honest way I can say it. He was present and consistent, and I trusted him, which is not something I do quickly. We were together for almost 2 years. What happened? He decided he wasn't able to do it, not because of anything specific. He said, she stopped, started again. He said that being with me meant being secondary, that my work would always come first, that he'd always be in the periphery, that he wasn't built for that. And the terrible part was that I couldn't tell him he was wrong, because at the time he probably wasn't. She said it without self-pity, which made it worse somehow. I was running a company that needed everything I had. I was making choices every day that didn't leave a lot left over. Do you think it's different now? I think I'm different now. Whether that translates, she shrugged slightly. I don't know yet. Nathan looked at her. She was staring out at the market with a particular expression that he recognized from mirrors. The look of someone who has told a true thing about themselves and is now sitting inside the discomfort of having said it out loud, waiting to see what happens next. I think, he said slowly, that most people who've been hurt don't stop being careful. They just get better at pretending they aren't. She looked at him. I wasn't criticizing it, he added. I know you weren't. She held his look for a moment longer. Are you careful? Very. You don't seem it. What do I seem like? She thought about it. Someone who decided to just do the thing without a lot of protective framing around it. The protective framing doesn't actually protect anything, he said. It just delays the exposure. I'd rather know early what I'm dealing with. She nodded slowly. That's either very brave or very efficient. Probably just efficient. Lily arrived back from the ceramic stall holding a small blue bowl that she was looking at with the expression of someone who had made a significant decision. Dad, she said, I would like this bowl. He looked at the price on the sticker on the bottom. That's your birthday money range. I know. I want to spend it on this. It's a bowl, Lily. It's a good bowl. The lady said the blue comes from copper in the glaze. She held it up to let the light come through it. Look. Nathan looked. The light did something interesting through the blue. He looked at Victoria, who was watching Lily with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Open, quiet, like something she was used to keeping behind glass had moved to the front. It's a good bowl, Victoria said. See? Lily said to Nathan. He bought the bowl. Lily carried it in both hands for the rest of the market, which meant she could no longer carry the squash, so Nathan carried the squash, which was heavier than it looked. They ate lunch at a place near the market that had outdoor seating and a menu Lily approved of, which meant it had grilled cheese. Victoria ordered something with roasted peppers that she let Lily try, and Lily delivered a measured verdict of not bad for a vegetable thing, which Victoria accepted with the gravity the assessment deserved. Conversation at lunch was easier than it had any right to be, which Nathan had stopped being surprised by. The surprise itself had faded into something closer to just noticing. He noticed that Lily talked to Victoria the way she talked to people she'd already decided were safe, which meant freely and without editing herself. He noticed that Victoria never talked down to Lily, never adjusted her vocabulary into something performative, just spoke to her like a person who had reasonable things to say. At one point, Lily asked, "Do you have any kids?" Victoria said, "No, not yet." Lily considered this. "Do you want some?" "Lily," Nathan said. "It's a real question," Lily said. "Some people don't want kids. That's fine. I'm just asking." Victoria looked at Nathan with an expression that was clearly suppressing something. Then she looked at Lily. "I think I'd like to eventually. I haven't really let myself think about it too seriously." "How come?" "Because I've been busy." A pause. "And because I wasn't sure I'd found the right situation." Lily nodded seriously. "My dad says time is everything for most things." "Your dad sounds pretty smart." "He's okay," Lily said, and Nathan chose to take that as a compliment. The afternoon moved the way. Saturday afternoons moved when nothing was scheduled and nobody was in a particular hurry, loosely, with room in it. After lunch, they walked in the direction of a small park 2 blocks from the market, partly because Lily had spotted a fountain that interested her, and partly because nobody was ready to end the day yet, though nobody said that out loud. The fountain turned out to be dry, late season, probably shut off for maintenance. But the park had a good climbing structure and a bench that caught the afternoon light. And Lily was on the climbing structure inside of 90 seconds, while Nathan and Victoria sat on the bench and watched her, and talked in the easy mid-conversation way that didn't require context because there was already context, which was its own kind of marker. "She's quick," Victoria said, watching Lily navigate the top of the structure with no apparent concern for altitude. "She has no fear." Where does she get it? He thought about it. Her mother was the same way. Claire would try anything once. He said the name without bracing for it, which was different from how it used to be. 3 years ago, he couldn't have said it at a park bench with the sun on his face and stayed level. Now he could. Lily got that. She got a lot from Claire. What did she get from you? He watched his daughter descend the structure and immediately start looking for the next challenge. The stubbornness, he said. The thing where she decides something and doesn't undecide it easily. That's mine. Is that a problem? Depends on what she decides. Victoria was quiet for a moment. You talk about Claire easily, for someone who lost her 4 years ago. I learned to. Took a while. He leaned forward slightly, forearms on knees. For about a year I couldn't say her name without it derailing everything around it. Like the word had too much charge. He looked at the park. I got tired of that. Not of missing her. That's different. That doesn't go away. But of the name being a live wire, I made myself use it, said it out loud every day for a while, mostly to Lily, just in conversation, just so it was a word again, and not only an event. Victoria was very still beside her. That took courage, she said. It took annoyance, he said. I was annoyed at myself for being afraid of a word. That's not the same as courage. Maybe courage is just what you call it when annoyance at yourself exceeds fear of the thing. He turned to look at her. That's a good definition. I have them occasionally. Lily came back to the bench at intervals to report on findings. A beetle she'd found near the base of the climbing structure, which she described in detail and then returned to its location, because it lived there and that was rude. A crack in the park path that she'd decided was probably a fault line. Probably not, Nathan said. Probably exactly that, Lily maintained. A conversation she'd had with another child at the fountain about the optimal pet situation, during which she had apparently argued in favor of medium dogs, and the other child had argued for cats, and they had not reached agreement but had parted respectfully. Do you have any pets? Lily asked Victoria during one of these check-ins. No, no dog, no cat. What about fish? No fish. Plants? A few. Does that count? Lily thought about it. Kind of, she said, and went back to the climbing structure. I passed, Victoria said quietly, with something close to relief. Conditionally, Nathan said. She'll revisit the plant situation. Victoria laughed, and he was starting to know the variations of it well enough to classify them. There was the short, surprised one when something caught her off guard. There was the slow one when something was actually funny, and she'd let herself feel it. There was the quiet one she mostly kept to herself. This was the slow one. He was partial to all of them, but especially the slow one. The afternoon was starting to thin. The light had moved from warm to something cooler, the specific shift that happened around 4 o'clock in October when the sun started thinking about leaving. Lily had finally exhausted the climbing structure and was now sitting on the edge of a planter and drawing in a small notebook she carried in her jacket pocket. She drew constantly, had since she was 3, a habit Nathan had always fed with new notebooks and didn't try to direct or interpret. Can I see? Victoria asked when Lily came back. Lily held up the notebook. She'd been drawing the fountain, the dry one, with the basin and the central column and the shapes of the benches around it. It was surprisingly precise for a 7-year-old. The proportions were off in the way 7-year-old proportions were off, but the observation behind it was real. She'd gotten the way the column fluted at the top, the way the basin lip curved. This is really good, Victoria said, and she wasn't performing it. Nathan could tell she wasn't performing it. I know, Lily said, not arrogant, just accurate. My teacher says I'm perceptive. Your teacher's right. Lily took the notebook back and studied her own drawing for a moment. I'm going to do the climbing thing too, she said, for when I'm old and I can't remember what it looked like. Nathan looked at his daughter, 7 years old, drawing the world around her so she wouldn't forget it. He thought, as he sometimes thought in moments like this, that she was going to be fine, that whatever he'd done wrong in the last 4 years, and whatever he would inevitably do wrong going forward, the essential person inside his daughter was solid in a way that didn't come from him, or came from him only in part, and the rest was just her. Victoria was looking at Lily too, and she had the expression again, The open one, the one that looked like something behind glass moving to the front. They walked back to the market parking lot together around 4:30. The day had run almost 7 hours, which was longer than any of them had planned, and Nathan knew it only because he checked his phone and registered the number with mild surprise. It hadn't felt like 7 hours. It had felt like the amount of time things should take when they're going the way they're supposed to. Lily, who had been starting to droop slightly around the edges in the way that children got when they'd used up their energy reserves and were running on pure social momentum, was holding Nathan's hand and carrying her bowl in the other arm, pressed against her side. She'd insisted on holding it herself the entire day. Nathan had offered 3 times to put it in a bag. She'd declined 3 times. He'd stopped offering. At the corner of the parking lot, where Victoria's car was apparently in a different direction than Nathan's, they stopped. Lily looked up at Victoria. "This was a good day," she said. "It really was," Victoria said. "We should do it again." Nathan started to say something about not putting pressure on things, and Lily looked at him with an expression that was very specifically his own expression turned back at him, the one that said he was about to add a complication that wasn't necessary. "We should do it again," he agreed. Victoria looked at him with something in her eyes that was warm and a little unguarded and trying not to be more than it was yet, which was exactly how he felt about all of it. "Yeah," she said. "We should." Lily seemed to take this as settled. She said goodbye to Victoria with the same directness she'd said hello. "Bye, Victoria. Thanks for buying my lunch." And then looked at Nathan. "I need to get home. My feet are tired." "Your feet are tired. And I want to put the bowl on my bookshelf before dinner." He looked at Victoria over the top of his daughter's head. She was smiling, the slow one. "Sunday," he said. "If you're around." "I'm around Sunday. I'll text you." She nodded. And that was how it ended, without anything dramatic. Just 2 people in a parking lot agreeing to continue something they'd started, and a 7-year-old between them who had already moved on to thinking about her bookshelf. I was cooking pasta that evening when his phone buzzed on the counter. "Victoria." I looked up Triceratops frill defensive utility on the way home. "Your daughter is completely right, and I feel like I wasted years not knowing this." He set down the wooden spoon, typed back, "Don't tell her that or she'll talk about it for a month." Victoria. "I'm going to tell her exactly that." Nathan. "I know you are." Victoria. "She's remarkable. I mean that." He looked at his phone for a moment. Lily was at the kitchen table behind him, the blue bowl now positioned at the exact center of a cleared space she'd created on the table so she could look at it while he cooked. She was drawing again, something he couldn't see from this angle, probably the market, or the park, or the dry fountain. He typed, "She is." And then, after a moment, "Today was good." Victoria. "Yeah, it was." He put the phone down and went back to the pasta. Behind him, Lily hummed something tuneless and drew in her notebook, and the kitchen was warm and the butter was in the pan, and the day had been the right length and the right shape. And Nathan Carter, who had stopped expecting that from days about 4 years ago, stood at his stove and let himself notice that without immediately finding a reason to put it away. That was as much as he was willing to say about it, even to himself. But it was something. It was genuinely something. Sunday came with low clouds and the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Nathan made breakfast at 7, eggs and toast and coffee, the reliable architecture of a Sunday, while Lily sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas with the blue bowl in front of her, eating cereal and looking at the bowl between bites the way people looked at things they were still deciding about. She'd moved it from her bookshelf twice in the past 2 days, testing different positions. It kept coming back to the kitchen table. "Are we seeing Victoria today?" she asked. "Later this afternoon, around 2. "Where are we going?" "I thought we'd walk by the river, the path down by Caldwell Bridge." Lily considered this. "Should I bring my notebook?" "Bring whatever you want." She brought the notebook, a second pencil in case the first one broke, her jacket with the hood, and an opinion about riverbirds she'd been developing since a field trip 2 months ago. Nathan drove them through the Sunday quiet of the city, which had a different texture than weekday quiet. Looser, less purposeful, people moving at the speed of people who didn't have anywhere they absolutely had to be. Victoria was waiting at the trailhead parking lot when they pulled in. She was wearing a dark blue jacket and had her hair pulled back and was looking at her phone when they arrived. But she put it away before she'd fully registered that they were there, which Nathan noticed and filed. "Hi, Victoria," Lily said, jumping out of the car with both hands already occupied. notebook in one, the extra pencil tucked behind one ear. Hi, Lily. Victoria looked at the pencil. Is that standard equipment? Back up, Lily said. In case. Smart. I know. Nathan locked the car and they started down the path without particular ceremony, falling into the easy three-person formation that they'd found at the market. Lily slightly ahead, operating at her own pace and investigation radius. Nathan and Victoria walking together with enough space between them that it was comfortable and enough proximity that it was something. The river was low for October, the water gray-green under the cloud cover, moving with the quiet authority of water that had been moving that direction for a very long time and had no particular opinion about whether anyone was watching. There were a few other people on the path, a couple with a stroller, an older man with a retriever that Lily immediately assessed, and then looked back at Victoria with an expression that communicated, "See, this is what I was talking about." "His name is Frank," the older man said, because Lily had already crouched down to say hello to Frank, who was accepting the attention with the stoic dignity of an old dog who had made peace with most of the world. "Frank is a good name," Lily said. "Is he old?" 11. "That's old for a dog." She looked at Frank with something close to reverence. "You've had a lot of mornings," she told him. The man looked at Nathan and Victoria with the expression of someone who didn't know what to do with that. Nathan didn't either. Victoria was looking at Lily with the open expression again, the one he'd started to recognize as what her face did when something got past her defenses without trying to. They walked on. Frank and his owner continued the other direction. Lily reported back on the dog situation with the thoroughness it deserved. About a mile down the path, where the river curved and there was a wide, flat area with benches overlooking the water, Lily found a section of interesting rocks near the bank and declared herself occupied, leaving Nathan and Victoria on a bench a reasonable distance away with the particular gift of a child who had her own agenda. "She's consistent," Victoria said. "She's been like that since she could walk. She identifies what interests her and she goes after it, and everything else is just logistics." He watched Lily crouch over a rock with her notebook already open. "I don't know where she gets the focus. Claire was more scattered. She had about 15 things going at once and loved all of them. I'm focused, but I'm narrower about it." "Maybe she got the focus from you and the range from Claire." "Maybe." He leaned back on the bench. The clouds had moved some while they'd been walking, and a thin strip of pale light was coming through over the far bank of the river. "How was your week?" "Long." She said it in the flat way people said things that were true and didn't need elaboration. "We had a board meeting Wednesday that ran 4 hours and resolved nothing, which is actually worse than a meeting that resolves something bad, because at least with a bad resolution, you have something to respond to." What were they not resolving? Expansion strategy. Whether to move into the European market now or wait 18 months. "I want to move now." 3 of the 5 board members want to wait. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. The other 2 have no opinion, which is in some ways the most aggravating position. "Why do you want to move now?" "Because the market won't be the same in 18 months. There are 2 competitors positioning for the same space, and the window for the strongest entry is the next 6 to 8 months. Waiting is a decision. It's just a passive one, which is how people justify it to themselves." She said it without heat, but with precision, the way she talked about work things, the language sharpening. What do the 3 who want to wait say? That the infrastructure isn't ready, that moving too fast will strain operations, that we need another 2 quarters of domestic consolidation before we can support international growth. A pause. "They're not entirely wrong. The infrastructure argument has merit, but I've built this company by being slightly ahead of comfortable, and I'm not going to stop now because 3 people want to feel settled." "Have you told them that?" "Not in those words." "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because there's a version of that speech that lands well, and a version that lands as arrogance. And in a board meeting with 5 people who already have fixed opinions, I can't control which version they hear." "So you're managing how it lands." "I'm always managing how things land." She said it without apology, but there was something underneath it. Not quite fatigue, more like an acknowledgement that the management was exhausting. "It's different with you," she added. "I don't manage it here." He looked at her. She was watching the river, her expression in profile. "I noticed," he said. "Is it obvious?" "Not obviously. I just pay attention." She was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you that I'm different in professional contexts?" "Why would it?" Some people find it contradictory. They meet me somewhere like this and then they see me in a work context and they think one of the versions is fake. Neither of them is fake. They're both real for the context. He looked at the river. I'm different at work too. More contained. I don't talk much on the job. What do you do? Fix things. Think. Listen to the building. He paused. Buildings tell you a lot if you pay attention. Most people just exist in them. I actually listen. She turned to look at him. What do they tell you? Where the stress points are. What's been deferred too long. What's working harder than it should. He thought about how to say the next part. You can feel it in the systems. Everything's connected in a building. Electrical, plumbing, structure, HVAC. If one thing's off, it usually shows up somewhere else. The symptom and the cause are almost never in the same place. Victoria was very still beside him, in the particular way she went still when something landed differently than expected. That's exactly how companies work, she said. I know. She was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a classification for. You've thought about this. I think about systems. It's what I do. He glanced at her. Your infrastructure problem and your expansion problem probably aren't separate problems. She was quiet. Processing, he'd learned, not withdrawn. The infrastructure isn't ready because the resources went somewhere else, he said. Domestic consolidation, short-term stability, which is the same instinct as the board wanting to wait. It feels responsible. But responsible and correct aren't always the same thing. No, she said quietly. They're not. The fix usually isn't at the symptom. It's upstream. He stopped himself. Sorry, that's not helpful input on something this complicated. Don't apologize for that. She said it sharply, but not unkindly. That was more useful than 4 hours on Wednesday. He said nothing. Across the river, a heron had landed on a rock and was doing what herons did, which was stand with the absolute patience of something that understood that waiting was not wasted time. Lily had looked up from her rocks and spotted the heron and was now drawing it with the careful attention she brought to things worth keeping. They found a conflict on the walk back. Not between them. Between the afternoon and the fact that Marcus had texted Nathan at some point during the river walk with a message that began, "Hey, so don't be mad," and ended with the information that a woman named Joanna Voss, who was apparently a publicist and apparently Victoria's former publicist, was going to be at a small industry dinner the following Friday evening that Marcus had already RSVP'd to on Nathan's behalf because he'd gotten access to a +1 slot through the hotel's events team and thought it would be a good opportunity. Nathan read the full message twice. Then he showed it to Victoria. She read it. Her expression did several things in quick succession. Joanna Voss, she said. You know her. She ran my communications for 14 months. She left to start her own firm last year. Victoria handed the phone back. We didn't end badly. We just didn't end particularly well either. I can tell Marcus no. I know you can. She walked for a few steps without saying anything. Lily was ahead of them again, still carrying the notebook, already talking to herself quietly in the way she did when she was composing something. The dinner's a legitimate industry event. If Marcus got you a spot, it's probably worth going. Good people go to those things. She paused. I'm just telling you who Joanna is so you're not surprised if it gets mentioned. What would get mentioned? Victoria looked at the path in front of her. Joanna had opinions about how I presented myself publicly, about the balance between professional image and personal accessibility. We disagreed about it consistently, and at some point we disagreed about it too much. A pause. She thought I was too controlled, ironically. Are you? In public? Yes. Deliberately. Why? She stopped walking. Not dramatically. Just the way you stop when you want to have a conversation instead of talk while moving. He stopped too. Lily continued ahead, unbothered. Because every time I've been less controlled in a public setting, it's been used as something, she said. An article 2 years ago quoted me out of context after a panel discussion where I said something honest and off the cuff about the gender dynamics in tech funding. The quote was accurate. The framing made it sound like a complaint instead of an observation. It followed me for 6 months. She said it without heat, just the recitation of something that had happened and continued to have weight. So I got controlled. Not because I wanted to be managed, but because the alternative had a cost I didn't want to pay again. And Joanna thought that was overcorrection. Joanna thought that authentic public presence built better long-term brand equity, which is true technically, but she was measuring the wrong thing. Victoria looked at him. Brand equity doesn't fix a quote that gets screenshotted and recirculated for half a year. I wasn't trying to build brand equity. I was trying to keep working without every interview becoming about the one thing I said instead of the thing I was there to discuss. Nathan thought about that. He understood the mechanics of it, the way one thing became the story and everything else became context for that one thing, and how once that happened, you were always defending position instead of advancing. It happened in different language in his world, but the structure was the same. That sounds like being in a building that won't stop shifting, he said. You stop trying to fix the crack and you start just trying to keep the floor level. Yes, she said it like the word was a breath. Exactly like that. They stood on the path for a moment. Lily had realized they weren't behind her and turned around to look, assessed the situation as non-emergency, and turned back to whatever had caught her attention ahead. Do you want to come on Friday? He asked. To the dinner. She looked at him. I wasn't going to go. Do you want to come with me? A pause. That changes what it is. I know. She was thinking about it. He could see the calculation running, the same one he recognized now as the thing she did when weighing something personal against the accumulated experience of how personal things had gone before. He waited. He'd learned to wait. Yes, she said. Okay. Okay. They started walking again. Autumn. The Friday dinner was held in the private event room of a restaurant called the Harlow, which was the kind of establishment that existed entirely for occasions like this one. Muted lighting, round tables, waitstaff who moved without being seen, a guest list that had been curated with the specific goal of productive adjacency. It was the third event of this type that Nathan had been to in his life, and the first one that wasn't a hotel staff function. Marcus met him at the door with the expression of a man who had pulled off something he was extremely pleased about and was trying not to show it too obviously. You brought her, Marcus said very quietly, in the tone of someone narrating something they couldn't believe they were witnessing. She's right here, Marcus. I know she's right here. I'm just... He stopped. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, Victoria said, and she said it warmly and without performing warmth, the way she did when she actually meant something. Marcus looked briefly undone by this and recovered admirably. The room was about 40 people. Nathan recognized two faces from the hotel's events network, a catering manager he'd spoken to once and a venue coordinator he'd crossed paths with in the loading dock during a setup. Victoria recognized considerably more, and he watched her navigate the entry into the room with the skill of someone who had done this hundreds of times, the eye contact, the small acknowledgments, the way she moved through a space without either announcing herself or disappearing. She introduced him to 3 people in the first 20 minutes. Not as her date, not with any particular framing, just by name, with a sentence about context. Nathan works at the Hargrove Grand. He's how I ended up at events like this. Simple and true, without being reductive. He noticed the table they were seated at had 6 people. A tech journalist named Brendan, who wrote for an industry publication Nathan hadn't heard of. A woman named Sophia, who ran a design firm and was apparently friends with Victoria from a period 5 or 6 years ago. An investor named Paul, who had the particular energy of someone who was always half listening to the conversation he was in because he was anticipating the one he wanted to move to. And Joanna Voss. Joanna was somewhere in her mid-40s, precise and composed in a way that suggested she'd spent a lot of time learning exactly how composed to appear in any given room. She recognized Victoria across the table before they were introduced and did the very practiced thing of letting nothing cross her face except professional warmth. Victoria, she said, it's genuinely good to see you. You too, Joanna. Victoria said it without stiffness, but also without the fullness she used for people she actually meant it about. It was neutral, skilled, neutral. Joanna's gaze moved to Nathan with the particular assessment of someone in communications, cataloging, placing, filing. And you're, Nathan Carter, he said. Are you in the industry? Hospitality, facilities management. A small pause, just small enough that Nathan might have missed it if he hadn't been paying attention, which he was. Interesting, she said, and it meant nothing and everything. Dinner proceeded the way these dinners proceeded. The food arrived and was mostly good, The conversation circulated between professional topics and social adjacency, and the table had the specific dynamic of people who knew each other from various overlapping contexts and were performing the version of themselves appropriate to the room. At some point, the conversation settled on Ashford Creative Technologies. Not in a pointed way. It came up because Brendan had done a piece on creative tech companies expanding internationally, and Victoria's name was on the relevant list. The board situation didn't come up directly, but the expansion question did, and Victoria answered it the way she answered public questions about the company: measured, direct, not giving more than was strategic. Joanna, who had been listening with the attention of someone for whom listening was a professional instrument, said, "The European move is interesting timing. The infrastructure narrative has been a point of discussion in the coverage." "Infrastructure's being addressed," Victoria said. "Of course." A pause. "There was a piece in the business section last month that framed it as a readiness question. I thought the characterization was a bit reductive, personally." "It was," Victoria said, simply. "The counterargument was always going to be about timing," Joanna continued, and Nathan had the sense she was talking about something adjacent to the actual topic. About whether the optics of moving fast outweighed the substance of moving right. "Optics and substance aren't the same thing," Victoria said. "They aren't, but they interact." "They do. Which is why I've always thought the priority was getting the substance right and letting the optics follow." Joanna smiled, a professional one. "That was always where we diverged." "I know," Victoria said. "I haven't changed my position." It wasn't hostile, but it had edges, the way old professional disagreements had edges even after the heat was gone. Nathan ate his dinner and let it settle around him and watched Joanna the way he watched a system he was trying to understand. Paul, the investor, attempted to redirect the conversation towards something about venture capital cycles, and Brendan helpfully picked up the thread, and the moment passed. But Joanna glanced at Nathan once, briefly, with the look of someone recalibrating something they'd thought they understood about the composition of the evening. Later, during the transition between courses, when Victoria was in a brief side conversation with Sophia about something design-related that had come up, Joanna turned to Nathan with a directness that was probably calculated to look like candor. "How long have you known Victoria?" she asked. "About 6 weeks. And you're—" She gestured gently between the empty chairs. "We're having dinner together," he said, because that was accurate, and because he wasn't going to characterize it for a stranger in a way that would become a sentence somewhere. "She seems comfortable with you," Joanna said. And it was a genuine observation. He could hear that underneath the professionalism. It surprised her slightly. That's not always the case in group settings. "I know." A beat. "She's—" Joanna stopped herself, started differently. "I have a lot of respect for her. I want to say that. Whatever the end of our work together looked like, I have a genuine regard for what she's built." "I believe you," Nathan said. "She doesn't make it easy to know her." "No," he agreed. "She doesn't." "Has she—" Another stop. "Never mind. That's not an appropriate question." "Probably not," he said, without unkindness. Joanna looked at him for a moment with something closer to genuine curiosity than anything she'd shown so far. "You're not what I would have expected," she said. "From?" She glanced at Victoria, who was still talking to Sophia. "From someone she brought here." Nathan didn't respond to that. He finished his water and set the glass down and waited for Joanna to decide whether she had more to say. She apparently decided she didn't, and the moment passed. They left before the formal end of the evening, around 9:30, because the important conversations had been had, and the ones remaining were the kind that circled without arriving anywhere. Victoria made her exits the same way she made her entrances, without announcing them, with just enough acknowledgement to leave people feeling well regarded. Outside, the night was clear and cold. The earlier cloud cover had moved through, and the city was doing its nighttime thing with the lights and the traffic and the specific energy of a Friday. "How was that?" Nathan asked. "Fine." She walked beside him toward the parking garage. "Better than I expected." "Because of Joanna?" "Because I wasn't sure how you'd be in a room like that." She said it straightforwardly. "You were completely yourself. You didn't perform anything." "I didn't have anything to perform." "That's what I mean." She paused at the parking garage entrance. "Most people in there were performing something. Their professional version, their social version, the version they want to be associated with. You just sat there and ate dinner and paid attention." I'm a maintenance technician at a hospitality event. Nobody needed anything from me. I needed something from you, she said it simply. I needed someone at that table who wasn't calculating anything. It changes the air in a room, even slightly. He looked at her. The parking garage lighting was unflattering in the specific way fluorescent things were unflattering, and she looked tired in a way that the evening had exposed, the kind of tired that came from having managed yourself carefully for 3 hours. Joanna said something to you, she said. It wasn't a question. A few things. What? That she respects what you've built. That you don't make it easy to know you, that I wasn't what she'd expected. Victoria was quiet. In what sense? She didn't specify. I think she meant generally. She looked away at the parking structure's middle distance. She was never malicious, she said. Our disagreement was real, and I stand by my side of it. But she was never cruel about it. I know. I could hear that. She has opinions about how I handle my public image that I think are professionally sound and personally insufficient. She looked back at him. The thing she doesn't understand, couldn't understand because it would require being me, is that the cost of authenticity in public spaces isn't evenly distributed. For some people, it's just character. For me, it was a business liability. She said it flatly. That's not self-pity. It's just a different calculation. I know it is. She studied him. You always say that. I know, like you've already worked it out before I explain it. I usually have a version of it worked out. I don't always have the details. How? He thought about how to say it. I'm good at reading systems. People are systems. They have load-bearing structures and stress points and places where the damage is visible and places where it's been patched over. He looked at her. You've been patched in a few places. Most of the patches are solid. A couple are just cosmetic. She was very still. Which ones are cosmetic? The ones around how controlled you are in public. You've convinced yourself it's strategy. It's partly strategy. He paused. It's also armor. She didn't say anything for a moment. The parking garage hummed around them with its particular machine hum. I know, she said, and she said it in the same flat way he said it, which meant she'd worked it out already. The armor's understandable, he said. I'm not telling you to take it off. Then what are you telling me? Nothing. Just that I can see it, that I see you in there behind it. He looked at her steadily. That's different from most people seeing it. She looked at him for a long time. Something in her face was working through something. Nathan, she said. Yeah. I need to tell you something. She stopped. Started again. Not tonight, but soon. There's something I've been carrying around since before the first dinner, and I haven't said it, and I think I need to. Okay. It's not bad. I want to be clear about that. It's just something true that I've been not saying because it makes me vulnerable in a way I'm still not fully comfortable with. Okay, he said again. He wasn't going to push it. Soon, she said. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded once, and something in her posture changed slightly, not relaxed exactly, but rearranged. Like something had been moved from one place to another, and the new place was better for holding it. They walked to their cars. He texted Mrs. Okafor that he was on his way, got back a response that said Lily had been asleep since 8:30 and had insisted on placing the blue bowl on the nightstand before she'd agreed to go to bed. He told Victoria. She read it in the car before she drove away, and he saw through the window that she smiled at her phone, the slow one, the real one, before she put it down and started the engine. The weeks that followed moved in a way that Nathan had stopped trying to track precisely, because tracking time precisely was something you did when you were worried about it, and he had slowly, without fully deciding to, stopped being worried about it. There were Sunday mornings at the river and Saturday afternoons that turned into evenings without planning to, and dinners at his apartment that started as simple pasta and expanded over time as Victoria got familiar with his kitchen and started bringing things. Good olive oil, a specific vinegar she liked, once a cast iron pan that she said was better than his and which he couldn't dispute. Lily accepted all of this with equanimity. The pan warranted a brief inspection and a verdict of heavier than it looks, which was both accurate and not really about the pan. Victoria started appearing at the margins of ordinary life rather than just the planned parts. A Tuesday evening when she'd been near the neighborhood after a meeting and texted to ask if they'd eaten yet. A Thursday morning when Lily had a half day and Nathan had to arrange coverage, and Victoria, who had a rare late start, had offered to take Lily to Oleander for breakfast, which Lily had accepted without hesitation and reported back on in complete detail. The blue bowl had migrated from the nightstand back to the kitchen table and now sometimes traveled to the windowsill and sometimes back. It was tracking something Lily hadn't articulated, but Nathan suspected it had to do with how the light hit it. It wasn't without difficulty. There were evenings when Victoria was managing something large at work, and the call lasted 2 hours, and she arrived late and distracted and needed time to decompress. And the decompressing looked like silence and closed-off posture that Nathan had learned wasn't about him, and waited out without filling it. There were moments when he felt the distance between their lives, not just financially, though that was real, but in terms of scale. The number of people whose days were affected by her decisions. The way her phone was always managing something. He was used to a life in which the consequences of his work were immediate and physical and contained. Her world operated on a different amplitude, and sometimes he felt it. There was one evening in November, about 9 weeks after the first dinner, when it became briefly concrete. He'd met her for dinner at a place near her office. Her suggestion, her territory, one of those evenings that had been squeezed into a gap between her end-of-day obligations and a 7 o'clock call. She couldn't move. They'd been at the table for 20 minutes when 2 men approached. One of them Nathan didn't recognize. The other was the kind of man who moved through a room with the certainty of someone who had never really been told to wait. And he stopped at their table without asking and addressed Victoria in the way of someone who considered the conversation already started. "Victoria, I didn't know you were in tonight." He was smiling in the way people smile when the smile is doing something other than indicating warmth. "Who's your guest?" Nathan looked at the man. Mid-50s. Good suit. The kind of face that had been handsome and still carried the structural memory of it. "Nathan Carter," Victoria said. "Derek Marsh." "What do you do, Nathan?" Derek asked, with the tone of someone asking a question they expected to find amusing. "Facilities management," the smile held. "Hospitality?" "Hotel chain." "Interesting." Derek said it exactly the way Joanna had said it at the dinner, with the same slight register underneath. "Victoria, I heard the board is still working through the European question." "We are." "I know a few people in the Frankfurt office who'd be worth a call. I can send names." "I have the names I need," Victoria said. Politely. Finitely. "Of course." He paused. "Well, don't let me interrupt." He said it to Victoria, not to Nathan. Then his eyes moved to Nathan, briefly and with a particular quality, the look of a man performing a courtesy he didn't feel. "Good to meet you." He moved on. The companion who'd been with him had stood through all of it without saying anything. Nathan drank his water. Victoria watched the menu for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't have to apologize." "I know. I'm doing it anyway." She set the menu down. "Derek Marsh is on the peripheral edge of my industry. We've crossed paths at enough events that ignoring him isn't worth the energy it creates. He's harmless in the direct sense and exhausting in every other sense." "I noticed." "He does that, She searched for it. "The assessment," Nathan said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Did it bother you?" He thought about it honestly. "For about 10 seconds, he said. "Then I thought about whether his opinion of me changes anything about what I actually am, and it doesn't, so I let it go." She looked at him steadily. "You've had to do that your whole career," he said. "Let go of how people read you because the reading doesn't change the reality." "I'm still working on it," she said. "It still takes effort." "I know." He picked up his menu. "Order something. You've got a 7 o'clock." She looked at him for a moment longer with an expression he'd seen building over weeks, something accumulating, growing specific. Then she looked at her menu. "Nathan," she said without looking up. "Yeah. I know I said soon about the thing I needed to tell you." "Yeah. It's still soon. I'm getting there." She glanced up. "I just want you to know I'm getting there." "I'm not tracking the schedule," he said. And he meant it. She nodded, looked back at her menu. He could see the edges of the slow smile starting at the corner of her mouth, even though she was trying to contain it. "The pasta here is good," she said. "It's always pasta with you. You introduced me to good pasta. I'm holding you responsible." "Lily introduced you to good pasta. She made the request." "Fine. I'm holding Lily responsible." She put the menu down. "I'll tell her." She'll take that as a compliment, Nathan said. And they ordered, and the evening continued, and the 7 o'clock call happened on schedule, and he drove home after through the November streets with the heat on and the radio low, and the specific quality of contentment that he'd learned not to analyze too hard because it was the kind of thing that could be talked out of existence if you weren't careful. He pulled into the driveway, sat for a moment. The house lights were off except the kitchen, which was Mrs. Okafor's signal that everything was fine. He thought about what Victoria had said. I'm getting there. He was too. He'd been getting there for weeks, along a route he hadn't mapped in advance, towards something he was starting to be able to name without immediately finding reasons to qualify it. He just wasn't quite there yet either, and that he'd learned, from buildings, from grief, from the slow, reliable work of things that mattered, was not the same as not being on the way. The river in December was a different thing entirely from the river in October. The water was higher and darker, moving with more intention, the banks stripped of the color they'd had when Lily first crouched over rocks and drew the dry fountain in her notebook. The path along Caldwell Bridge was quieter now, fewer people, the cold keeping the casual walkers home, leaving mostly the committed ones, the runners who went year-round, the dog owners who had no choice, the occasional person who just needed to be outside near moving water for reasons they didn't owe anyone an explanation for. Victoria had suggested the river. Nathan had been mildly surprised. It was cold enough that his first instinct had been to suggest something indoors, but she'd been specific about it, specific in the way she was specific when she'd already decided something, and the suggestion was actually just information. The river path. Saturday morning. Just us, if that's okay. Lily was at Emma's house for a sleepover, the one with the lab that barked at the mailbox. Lily had been looking forward to it for 2 weeks, and had packed her overnight bag with the thoroughness of someone preparing for an expedition, including her notebook and both pencils, and for reasons she declined to explain, the blue bowl. She's taking the bowl? Victoria had said on the phone the night before. She said Emma needs to see it. Emma's 7. Lily believes in sharing things worth seeing. He'd paused. I've stopped questioning the bowl's itinerary. So it was just the two of them on the river path, which hadn't happened before. Every other walk had included Lily, which was its own good thing, but this was different. The space between them on the path was the same and wasn't the same. Victoria was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Not the managed quiet of someone composing themselves before a difficult conversation, more like the quiet of someone who needed to arrive somewhere before they could start. He knew that about her now. She wasn't a person who could rush the beginning of things. She got there when she got there, and pushing the pace produced worse results than waiting. He waited. The river made its sounds. Their footsteps made their sounds. Someone's dog somewhere ahead on the path barked once and then didn't bark again. I've been thinking about what I told you at the parking garage, she said, after the Friday dinner. That there was something you needed to say. Yes. She had her hands in her pockets. She walked looking mostly at the path, occasionally at the water. I've been getting there, like I said. I just kept finding reasons to defer it. What kind of reasons? The usual ones. Her voice was level. Fear dressed up as timing. I'm very good at that. I can make fear look like patience. I've had a lot of practice. He didn't say anything to that. It wasn't an observation that needed a response. The first time I really understood what was happening with us, she said, was about 3 weeks in. You texted me something about Lily. She'd said something at breakfast that made you laugh and you sent it without context. Just the thing she said, because you thought I'd find it funny. I remember. I was in a board prep, 12 people in the room, 50-page deck on the screen, and I looked at my phone because I thought it might be something operational, and it was just, Lily, and I laughed out loud in the middle of a sentence someone else was saying. A pause. Everyone looked at me. I apologized and put the phone away and went back to the meeting. But something had shifted, because for a moment I had completely forgotten the meeting existed. Nathan looked at the water. That hadn't happened to me before, she said. Not in a long time. Maybe not ever in that specific way, where something personal broke through the work without me allowing it. It just happened. What did you do with that? I filed it away and pretended it was nothing for about a week. She said it without self-consciousness. Then I admitted it was something and spent another week deciding what to do about it. Then I decided to do nothing and see if it went away. Did it? No. She said it simply. It got worse, in the best possible sense of worse. They reached the section of the path where the river curved, where the bench was, where they'd sat in October while Lily drew rocks. They didn't sit this time. They stood near the railing where the bank dropped away to the water, and the city was visible across the far bank in the gray December light, and the river moved below them with its particular December authority. "I've spent a lot of years being good at my work," Victoria said. "Not in the way people say that when they're being modest about it. I mean it seriously. I'm genuinely good at what I do. I understand systems. I understand people in professional contexts. I understand how to build something from a position of having very little and protect it once you have it." She paused. "What I'm not good at is trusting that something personal can be real without it eventually becoming about the other things. The money, the company, the way I'm perceived." "I know," he said. "The first one left when the success arrived. The second one was interested in the success and not in me. The third one couldn't stay in the shadow of it." She was quiet for a moment. "Every single serious relationship I've had has been shaped by the fact of what I've built. Either it drew people in for the wrong reasons or it pushed them away for complicated ones. I started to believe that was just the cost, the permanent condition. And then?" She looked at him. "And then Marcus Teller made a phone call to his friend at a PR firm, and you fixed an elevator in the East Wing, and somehow I ended up having dinner with someone who asked me what I was actually like before he knew anything else about me." She said it without drama, just as the fact it was. "You never asked about the company. Not that first evening, not the second one. It was weeks before you asked anything specific about the business, and when you did, it was because of a parallel you'd drawn in your own thinking, not because you were trying to understand what you were adjacent to." "The board meeting," he said. "The infrastructure problem." "Yes." She turned back to the water. "I'd never had someone do that. Just encounter me before encountering the fact of me." A pause. "I didn't know how to handle it at first. I kept waiting for the angle, for the moment when you'd ask the question that told me what you were actually after. The question never came. The question never came." She said it quietly, and that was harder to manage than the alternative would have been, because I know how to deal with people who want something. I know how to hold that kind of thing at a certain distance and make it work on my terms. But someone who just wanted to have dinner, who wanted to know if I had a dog, who texted me what his daughter said at breakfast because he thought it was funny. She stopped. "I didn't have a system for that." Nathan looked at the river. He thought about what he wanted to say and how to say it accurately, because accuracy mattered to him more than impressiveness, always had. He was thinking about a specific morning in late October when he'd been in the hotel's mechanical room running a diagnostic on the heating system, and he'd looked at his phone for the time and instead found himself thinking about the way she'd said, "I'm not managing anything right now at Oleander," and how it had settled in him like a thing landing in the right place, and how he'd recognized the feeling even though it had been long enough since he'd felt it that recognition had taken a moment. "I need to tell you something too," he said. She looked at him. "The last time I felt this..." He stopped, tried again. "After Claire died, I told myself the practical version of the story, that I was a single father, and that was the shape of my life, and everything else was secondary to making sure Lily was okay. That's true. That's all true." He looked at the water. "But there was another version of the story I was also telling myself, which was that I probably wasn't the kind of person something like this happened to again. Not because I was damaged or broken or any of the things people say, just practically. My life was configured a certain way. I worked a job that kept me in the background of other people's occasions. I went home to my daughter. I didn't have a lot of surface area for the rest of it." "The surface area thing," she said quietly. "The third one said something like that to me." "I know. You told me." He turned to look at her. "The difference is I wasn't using it as a reason to leave. I was just describing the life I'd built because it was safe to build it that way, small and functional and mine. And then, Marcus made a phone call," she said. "Marcus made a phone call," he agreed. "And I went to dinner because he wore me down and because I didn't have a good enough reason not to. And I walked into a restaurant and a woman sat down across from me and asked if I was Nathan before I'd said a word. And something happened in the first 20 minutes that I didn't have language for yet, but that I recognized." "What did you recognize?" He took a breath of the cold December air. It tasted like the river and the coming winter. That I was paying attention, he said. Not in the way you pay attention to be polite or to seem present, actually attending to another person. And it had been a while. Victoria was very still beside him. I didn't know what to do with that either, he said. So I did the same thing I do with everything else. I kept showing up, and I paid attention, and I let it be what it was. The river went on below them. On the far bank, a bird landed on a bare branch and sat there, orienting itself. I need to say the thing, Victoria said. The thing I've been not saying. Okay. She turned to face him fully, which was something she didn't always do. She often talked to the middle distance, to water or paths, or the contents of coffee cups. And he'd learned that this was not avoidance, but the way she composed herself when composing mattered. When she looked directly at him, it meant she was done composing and was just going to say the thing as it was. I think I've been in love with you since sometime in November, she said. I can't give you a specific date because it wasn't a specific moment. It was more like, one day I did the accounting and the number was what it was, and I couldn't unknow it. He held her eyes. I know that's fast, she said. I know it's a lot to say out loud. I've been holding it for about a month because saying it makes it real, and real things can be lost, and She stopped. I'm afraid of losing it, which is new for me. I'm usually more afraid of the vulnerability than of the loss, but with this, I'm more afraid of the loss. That's because you already know what it's worth, he said. She nodded once, pressed her lips together. She was doing the thing where she was holding something down, and he could see the effort of it. Victoria, he said, yeah. I've been in love with you since November, too. He said it the same way he said most true things, without performance, without softening it, just the fact of it placed between them where it could be looked at directly. I didn't say it because I was waiting for you to be ready to hear it, not because you asked me to wait, because I could see you getting there and I wasn't going to rush it. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite something else. It was the sound of relief leaving a body that had been holding it for a long time. You were waiting for me, she said. I was waiting with you. There's a difference. She looked at him. Her eyes were doing something complicated. Not tears. She wasn't a crier. He'd learned that. She expressed strong feeling in other registers. But something that lived near that territory. A fullness. Nobody has ever... She stopped. I don't have a good way to say this without it sounding like I'm making a speech. Then don't make a speech. I'm not good at this part, she said. The part where it's real. I know. He reached out and took her hand. It was cold from the December air, and she held his back with the particular grip of someone who had decided to hold on. That's okay. We'll figure out the real part as we go. She looked at their hands, then up at him, and the slow smile came, the real one, the one that wasn't managed or curated or calibrated for any room, just hers, just real, just the face she had when she'd stopped watching herself. They stood there by the river for a while, and the city did its city things across the water, and the bird on the far bank eventually decided it had somewhere to be and left. There are things nobody tells you about loving someone whose life is configured differently than yours. They don't tell you about the specific adjustment of being in a relationship where one person's ordinary decisions affect hundreds of people, and the other person's ordinary decisions affect a 7-year-old and a building's heating system. They don't tell you that this asymmetry is real, and it matters, and it requires actual attention, not just goodwill. Goodwill is not a structural solution. Nathan knew that better than most people. There were adjustments on both sides that weren't romantic and weren't painful, but were simply practical. The reality of two people with very different schedules and very different scales of daily consequence finding a shared rhythm. Victoria's mornings were often spoken for by 7 a.m. calls with team members in other time zones. Nathan's weekends were structured around Lily's schedule, which was not negotiable and which he had never pretended it would be. There were weeks in January when they saw each other twice. There was 1 week in February when a company crisis, a data security incident that turned out to be minor but required a week of major response, meant Victoria was essentially unreachable, except for late-night texts that arrived after he'd already gone to sleep, and that he read in the morning with his coffee as a kind of delayed conversation. He didn't make it a problem. Not because he didn't notice. He noticed everything, but because he understood the difference between a thing that was difficult and a thing that was wrong. The week was difficult. It wasn't wrong. When it ended, she called him from her car in the parking structure outside her office at 9:30 on a Friday night and talked for an hour. Not about the crisis, which was resolved and filed, but about a conversation she'd had with Daniel, her CTO, during the worst of it, and what it had made her think about the company and about herself and about what she wanted the next 5 years to look like. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He said what he actually thought, which was that she sounded like someone who had just looked at something clearly for the first time in a while and was working out what to do with the clarity. "That's exactly what it is," she said. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet." A pause. "Start by getting some sleep. Think tomorrow." "Good order." "Nathan." "Yeah." "Thank you for—" She stopped. He could hear her finding it. "For not making the week into something, for just being there when it was done." "Where else would I be?" It wasn't a question. She heard it as what it was. Lily found out in the way Lily found out most things. Not through a formal announcement, but through accumulation. Victoria was present enough, consistently enough, in ways small and ordinary enough, that at some point the question of what to call it resolved itself without being asked. It happened on a Saturday in February, during one of the evenings when the three of them had dinner at Nathan's apartment, which had become a regular enough thing that Victoria had started keeping the specific vinegar she liked on the second shelf of his pantry without asking. Lily had been doing homework at the kitchen table while Nathan and Victoria cooked, which was a thing they'd developed a functional system for in the way you develop systems when you spend enough time in a small kitchen with another person, who managed what, where to stand, how to hand things without getting in each other's way. Lily looked up from her homework at one point and watched them for a moment. Nathan became aware of being watched in the particular way you become aware of your 7-year-old watching you, which was with a sense of being assessed by someone whose conclusions you took seriously. "Are you guys together?" Lily asked. Nathan set down the wooden spoon. Victoria stopped slicing. "Yes," Nathan said. Lily nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was processing something she'd already half known. Like, "Actually?" "Actually." Another nod. She looked at Victoria. "Are you going to be here more?" "If that's okay with you," Victoria said. Lily thought about it with the specific gravity she brought to important questions. "The pan's already here," she said finally. "So, yeah, that's fine." She went back to her homework. Nathan looked at Victoria. Victoria was looking at the cutting board, but her shoulders had moved, a silent exhale of something held for longer than the conversation. "The pan," Nathan said quietly. "The pan," Victoria said, and the slow smile. Spring arrived the way. Spring arrived in a city, not with drama, but with incremental evidence. The trees along the river path got their color back. The market in the Callaway neighborhood reopened its outdoor section. Lily's school's science fair happened, and she presented a project on fossilization that her teacher called the most thoroughly researched entry she'd seen from a second grader, which Lily received without false modesty because false modesty had never been her way. Victoria came to the science fair. She didn't make it a big thing. She came as someone who wanted to be there, stood in front of Lily's display board, asked 3 specific questions about the fossilization process, and listened to the answers with the actual focused attention she brought to everything worth paying attention to. Lily's teacher asked who she was, and Nathan said a friend, which was the least complicated accurate answer for a second-grade science fair, and Victoria caught his eye across the gymnasium with an expression that meant she'd heard it and found it funny and was going to let it go. Afterward, the 3 of them got lunch at a diner near the school, the real kind of diner, with laminated menus and booths with cracked vinyl and milkshakes that came in the metal mixing cups. Lily had a grilled cheese. Victoria had a burger and ate it without ceremony, which remained one of Nathan's private benchmarks. The people who ate diner food without performing casualness about eating diner food were people worth knowing. "You should have asked about the mineral replacement process," Lily told Victoria between bites. "That's the most interesting part." "I asked about permineralization," Victoria said. "Isn't that related?" Lily pointed at her. "Yes, but the mineral replacement is different and also underrated. Like Triceratops." "Exactly like Triceratops." Lily picked up her grilled cheese. "You really do get it." "I've had good teachers," Victoria said, and she glanced at Nathan when she said it, which was not something Lily missed because Lily missed very little. Lily looked between them with an expression that was 7 years old and also extremely old. "You guys are kind of the same," she said. "How so?" Nathan asked. "You both think about things before you say them, and you both say exactly what you mean when you say it, and you both eat diner food like normal people." She returned to her grilled cheese. "I think that's a good combination." Nathan said nothing. Victoria said nothing. The diner did its diner sounds around them. Oh, the thing about arriving somewhere you weren't sure you'd get to is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with clarity or resolution. It just becomes gradually visible, the way the shape of a thing emerges when you're close enough to see it, and have been looking long enough for your eyes to adjust. Nathan understood his own life differently at the end of this year than he had at the beginning. Not better or worse, differently, with more of it visible. He was still a maintenance technician at the Hargrove Grand. He still showed up at 6:45 with his thermos and his notepad, still traced faults through the systems of a building that had come to feel like something he knew the way you knew a person, its tendencies, its weak points, the places where it held up better than expected, and the places where it needed more attention than it got. He was still good at it. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the shape of what the work fit inside. The edges of his life had moved. Not in ways that were loud or visible from the outside. He still lived in the same house, drove the same car, took the same route to work. But the internal geometry was different. There was more in it. He thought sometimes about what Marcus had said in the corridor that first day. "When's the last time you went anywhere with anyone?" And he'd heard it as an indictment and deflected it, but it was just a question, and the honest answer had been a long time, and the reason had been what reasons always were. A mixture of legitimate circumstance and choices that had once been protective and had calcified without his noticing. Grief did that. It built structures that made sense while you were inside them, and made less sense once you'd moved through and looked back. He didn't fault himself for it, but he noticed it clearly now, the way he'd narrowed his life to the dimensions of what felt safe, what felt manageable, what asked nothing of him beyond what he had left to give. And what he'd had left for a long time had been work and Lily, and not much else. He didn't know that anything had been missing because you couldn't miss the specific shape of something you'd never had. He'd known the absence in abstract, a vague weight that he didn't examine closely because examining it didn't change anything. He just kept moving. You kept moving because the alternative was not moving, and not moving was not an option when someone needed you to be there in the morning and make breakfast and know the difference between a Triceratops and a Styracosaurus. But he understood now what had been missing, because he had it, and having it cast the absence into relief the way light defines shadow. On a Saturday in late April, they were at the river again. This time all three of them, late morning, Lily on ahead with her notebook and the season's new birds to inventory, Nathan and Victoria on the bench where they'd sat the December morning she'd finally said the thing she'd been not saying. The river was different in April, faster, lighter, the color changed by the spring runoff, moving with an energy it hadn't had in December. The trees along the bank had come back. The path was busy. Victoria had a coffee. Nathan had a coffee. The ordinary Saturday assembled itself around them in the way it did now, with the ease of something practiced. "The board approved the European expansion," she said. He looked at her. "When?" "Thursday, 5-0. "What changed?" "I restructured the presentation." She held her coffee cup. "I stopped arguing about timing and started demonstrating infrastructure readiness. Showed them the gap analysis. Showed them the remediation plan. Showed them the 6-month runway." A pause. "And I stopped trying to manage how the argument landed and just made the argument." "What made you change the approach?" She looked at him. "Someone told me once that the fix is usually upstream, that you stop treating the symptom and you find the actual cause." She tilted her head slightly. "Turned out the board wasn't resistant to expansion. They were resistant to feeling like I hadn't listened to their concerns. So I listened, properly. And then I showed them I had. Did it feel like giving in? No." She said it with certainty. It felt like being right about what the actual problem was. She drank her coffee. "There's a difference between managing how you come across and actually understanding what someone needs to hear. I'd conflated them. They're not the same thing." Nathan looked at the river. "What does the expansion mean for your schedule?" "More travel, at least through the end of the year. Berlin, Amsterdam, probably Paris twice. She said it without apology, but also without glossing over it. I want to be honest about that. It's going to be harder some months. I know. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about the apartment, she said. He looked at her. Mine, she said. It's set up for one person. It has been for a long time. I've never... She stopped. Found the next part. I've been thinking about what it would mean to set it up differently. Not right now. Not as a statement about anything specific. Just as an acknowledgement that the way it's configured might not be the right configuration anymore. Nathan understood what she was saying and what she was not saying. She was not proposing anything. She was describing a change in how she was thinking about something, which was a different thing, and she was telling him about it because she'd gotten into the habit of telling him things when they were still forming, which was its own kind of intimacy, the sharing of unfinished thoughts with someone you trusted not to make them into more than they were, or less. Okay, he said. Okay? Okay, that makes sense. She looked at him for a moment. You don't have a reaction to that? I have several. I'm letting them settle before I talk about them. What are they settling into? He thought about it honestly. Into something that feels right for where we are, he said. Not rushed. Not held back either. Just the right pace. The right pace, she said. Yeah. She nodded slowly. I can work with that. Lily arrived back from her bird inventory with 4 new entries and a strong opinion about a Canada goose she'd encountered near the water's edge, which she described in the specific moral terms she reserved for animals that had behaved badly. The goose had apparently made a move toward her notebook and she'd had to retreat, which she was not satisfied about. It was very aggressive, she reported. Canada geese are famously aggressive, Victoria said. It had no reason to be. I wasn't bothering it. Sometimes things are defensive before they know if there's a threat, Nathan said. It didn't know you. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. That's actually a good point, she said, which was her highest form of concession. She sat down on the bench between them, the notebook open on her lap. The goose entry was already recorded, a small sketch and a 3-word assessment, unnecessary, territorial, rude. You drew it, Victoria said, looking at the notebook. I draw everything worth remembering. Is the goose worth remembering? Lily looked at the sketch. The encounter is, she said, not the goose. Nathan looked past his daughter at Victoria, who was looking at the notebook with the expression he knew best. The open one, the unmanaged one, the one that had nothing behind glass because she'd stopped keeping things there when it came to this. This was what he hadn't been able to predict in the weeks before the first dinner when Marcus was making his argument in the service corridor. Not the falling in love, that part, once it was happening, had its own internal logic that was in retrospect almost inevitable. But this, the ordinary weight of a Saturday. The river and the coffee and the territorial goose. The 7-year-old's field notes, and the woman beside her reading them with the focused attention she brought to things she cared about. The way 3 people could occupy a bench and occupy each other's lives and make it feel not perfect. It was never perfect. There were hard weeks and difficult evenings and moments where the distance between their lives was real and had to be managed consciously, but right. Functional. True. He'd built a life in the aftermath of loss by focusing on what was load-bearing. Lily. Work. The bare minimum of everything else. It had been the right structure for what it was, a structure for surviving and for giving his daughter what she needed. He didn't regret it. He'd needed it. But structures weren't permanent. Buildings changed. You opened walls that had been sealed and found they'd been hiding something that needed attention, sometimes damage, sometimes just space, sometimes both. The work was to deal honestly with what you found instead of resealing it because the sealed version had gotten familiar. He'd opened a wall. He'd found something worth keeping. That was, he'd decided, about as much as anyone could reasonably ask of a given year. Lily turned a page in her notebook and started drawing the river. Not the goose, not the bench, not the 3 of them, just the river, the water moving in the direction it moved, the far bank, the small, precise shape of things seen and decided worth keeping. She drew the world around her so she wouldn't forget it. He watched his daughter draw and let the morning be what it was. The coffee cooling, the river going, the woman beside him close enough that her shoulder was against his, and neither of them had moved to create distance. And he thought about what he'd told Victoria that December morning, which was that he'd recognized something in the first 20 minutes of dinner, recognized it the way you recognize something you hadn't seen in a while, but that had always been yours. He'd been right about that. Some things you didn't find. You just eventually stopped moving fast enough to miss them. And sometimes, not always, not on any schedule, with no regard for convenience or good timing or whether your life was configured to receive it, something arrived anyway. Even in the background of other people's occasions. Even when your thermos had a coffee ring on it and your notepad was bent in your back pocket and you were 32 years old and you'd taught yourself to stop expecting the rooms of your life to have more in them than what you'd put there. Even then. Especially then.